record on this. Great. Rewind quickly to what I said before. There are some assumptions that we already live with, that music is advancing in its expression and its musical language, both melody and harmony and rhythm. And it starts back in the medieval period, which was just plain chant, and then got a little bit more complicated in the 11th century with Leonin and Perotin. If you don't know those names, you will eventually. And then we had polyphony exploring, multiple voices going at the same time. And then not only were we going from modal, but to tonal music, major, minor. And then even further, we started doing larger ensembles and not just choral music, vocal music, but we had lots of instruments, and we had families of instruments, winds, brass, percussion, and strings. And it got very complicated and allowed many, many ways of expressing music. I'm giving you a bum's rush through the history of music from the Western perspective. What's important to recognize is during the Gregorian chant period of music, there was music going on in Africa and in Australia, and there was music going on in China. That is not how we teach music in the United States and oftentimes in Europe. And so it's important, if you've never even thought of this, it's important to think, I wonder what was going on in 1000 AD. First of all, that timing, the year 1000 AD is very Christian-based and Western European-based. So, everyone's got different systems of organizing time if you start thinking about this. Whether you're in Europe in the 1000 AD, or if you're in China or Africa or South America. The Incans had their own method of timing things. So I think it's important to recognize that there's been many cultures going on simultaneously to what we think of as Western musical history. Not only the music, but the time. So I'm now going back to the European method. That was a little sidebar. Back to the European history, we ended up going to the Baroque, and then the classical period, and then the Romantic period, and then the contemporary period. And I would say roughly the 1600s going into the 1700s for Baroque, 1700 in the 1800s in the classical, early 1800s through the early 1900s was the Romantic, and then the early 19th into right now, we're in the contemporary. And in each of those larger structures of time, there was more and more experimentation, more expressive, more options available to you. You started having chromatic harmonies in the Romantic period, but we started having all kinds of innovations, musical innovations that were happening in each of those eras. Now, that was the bum's rush through the history of music. Now I'd like to bring you up to speed to where we are. I'm going to go back to where I was in my notes. So you should refer back. The idea of dissonance is something that we just take for granted, that in today's music, dissonance is just part of what is going on in music. But I'm putting a very specific here, hold on a second. I wanted to do, all right, a specific reference. That's a German word that I will not translate for you. There we go. Here we go. I'm now going back into the 1950s, 1940s after World War II. The role that dissonance had that was playing in America, and I'm just going to focus on American music history. There was all of the stuff that was going on in Europe was now translated into the United States. And in the United States, coming back after World War II, there was a lot of what was called experimental music. Let me get this organized here in front of me. Experimental music was a term that was used to describe modern music, contemporary music. And let's see, here we go. Dissonance was just something that was in the air. We were trying out different ways of harmony, for example, and melody was an example. You can see, for example, under the link that says be-bop, does everyone have that document in front of them? It'll be helpful because I'm not going to go deep on any one of these topics, but it's a link to be-bop, and there's examples and a short history video there. So please use that link to sort of look into this. So bebop was sort of trying out a new style of jazz, which was considered an American art form, but it was really based on European models. There was a tempo, there was meters, there were melodies, and there were harmonies that were being used widely. And that's really a quick and general history of what was going on with jazz. But jazz was at this time revolutionized by bebop. And there are a number of figures in the history of bebop that I think are important to recognize. If you scroll down from that link, when you go to the link, you'll see Charlie Parker, a really advanced saxophone player and incredible improviser, Dizzy Gillespie. Now, what and other jazz musicians, John Coltrane, for example. Now, I'm going to share the document, if you don't mind. Here we go.
In the 1940s, the younger generation of jazz musicians forged a new style out of the elementary swing of the 1930s. This new hip form of jazz, characterized by fast tempos, virtuosic technique, and improvisation based on harmonic structure, was founded in Kansas City, Missouri. This radical change into what we know as jazz today swept America off its feet and created a whole new era of the music industry. Essential bebop jazz founders include saxophonist Charlie Parker, trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie, drummer Art Blakey, and pianists Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk. These musicians were influenced by earlier, more conventional jazz players such as saxophonist Sidney Bechet, trumpeter Louis Armstrong, and pianist Art Tatum and Scott Joplin. These predecessors comprised much more comprehensible pieces of music compared to the totally eccentric methods and techniques of their successors.
I just want to say Sidney Bechet isn't pronounced Sidney Bechet.
Now we will present a brief history of the big three founders of bebop jazz and their contributions to American music.
Now, what is the meter here? If you said 4/4, that would be correct.
Charlie Parker was born August 29, 1920 in Kansas City, Kansas. Parker started playing the alto sax at the age of 11. He joined his school band at the age of 14 but was actually kicked out due to his terrible playing. Later called the Bird, this talented musician sometimes integrated jazz with other musical genres from classical all the way to Latin music. Because of this, Parker created visionary paths that later musicians would follow. Should you know, PNG, Charlie Parker learned Cherokee in all 12 chromatic keys and could play them all into the hundreds of beats per minute.
So 100 beats per minute, all keys. He was a virtuoso player, and you heard all of the influences that he was using. Latin music, which was based oftentimes on Germanic models, marches and dances, waltzes. He was looking at jazz standards, which were basically pop tunes, and then they would do a cover of a jazz standard, which was a pop tune, and you would say, "Oh, let's do a jazz up version of a pop tune," and we'll just improvise on that.
It only took him 15 hours a day for 2 years.
What's the instrumentation is an important thing to listen for. What instruments are playing?
Parker claimed that Cherokee was the key to his music, and he borrowed from it to compose his first recording, Coco. Coco is considered one of the first bebop songs of all time. Charlie Parker actually refused to call his music bebop jazz because he felt it demeaned the music. Speaking of demeaning, Charlie Parker was a critical heroin addict. After abusing his body his whole life, Charlie the Bird Parker died on March 12, 1955 in his New York City apartment, only living to be 35 years young. The coroner who performed an autopsy on Parker's body mistook him for a man in his early 60s. Despite his very young and unfulfilled life, Parker completely revolutionized commercial music as we know it. Please enjoy our reenactment of one of many of Parker's hits, Parker's Mood.
Ladies and gentlemen, please get up for Charlie Parker.
It was not Charlie Parker, nor is it Thelonious Monk, nor is it Art Blakey or any of those guys. This is Charlie Parker music and lip syncing.
Thelonious Monk was born October 10, 1917 in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He taught himself how to play the piano at a very young age, and because of this, he has been criticized for having...
I'm going to go on to the next thing, but this is a video that you can check out, and it's being produced by a young person, but it's accurate except for Sidney Bechet. Sidney Bechet is not Sidney Bechet or Beckett or however she pronounced it. I don't remember. But this is an important sort of background on the history of bebop. Now, what we're talking about is what's going to be called free jazz, and it grew out of what was going on in bebop. These legendary foundational artists, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane, were all impressive and important composers and improvisers. They would oftentimes improvise off of a bunch of chords, a chord chart, and using a melody. So it would be written down, a melody be written down, and the chord chart would be written down, and they would interpret that in whatever different ways they had. But it gives you an idea that all of these folks were playing off of the same chart. There's the same chords, melody that they were improvising off of. And as a result, that was the organizing principle behind how that music was coming about. Whether it was a pop song or it was an original composition, these pieces were written down. And to a certain extent, that's how that music worked. Oh, hello. Now, I'm going to get out of here. There we go. Next section I'd like to talk about. Right. Got too many things going on here. Hello. There we are. Free jazz. You'll also see a link to free jazz. Let me get there. Am I sharing? I am not sharing. Let me do that. Free jazz is a style of avant-garde music, which was called, avant-garde was another word for experimental or new or contemporary. These are all interchangeable words in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And this didn't just refer to jazz. It was also being applied to concert music that would be done in basically concert stage with regular instrumentation, an orchestra, a chamber ensemble. And if you think of it, big bands and combos are the equivalent in jazz. And they were trying to do this experimental approach to how can we do this music in a completely new way? We've done all sorts of chromaticism. We've done alternative chords. Bebop is a different approach to writing melody and writing and music, the rhythms and the tempi and how the music is put together. That was a different way of putting together the music. Here is Ornette Coleman. Hear this? Thumbs up if you can hear it. There's a lead, and there's a rhythm, and there's alternate accompanying key parts to this voicing. Clearly, the saxophone is fun. The phrase structure, unpredictable. And the harmonic structure doesn't really exist in the form of chords. Everybody's moving through the same chords. Snippet. And what we would call, what did Jacob call this? I think he called it not leitmotif. He called it, anybody can unmic themselves or mic themselves. What did Jacob call his little 2 to 5 note motives? That's what's literally, if you listen carefully, you'll hear little motives by each of these players, but they're not writing long melodies that go 8 measures. It would be hard to dance to this. Really hard to figure out where the beat is. Ba, boo, ba, boo, boo. And it's not meant to be that way. It's important to recognize that now Ornette Coleman is considered one of the great geniuses by many composers, many musicians today. I would say, would you raise your hand if you ever heard of the name Ornette Coleman? Okay, my point is very few people know who this composer is. He was a theoretician who came up with this term called harmolodics. You will find that in your, if I can find it. Wow, there we are. Harmolodics is one of the terms that you will know. Here is a video of, hold on a second. There we go. I'm going to share this. Boom. Share. Go.
I think of myself as a composer, and I have written music that I now call harmonic.
Remove the caste system from sound.
Caste system of sound.
You know, you were talking about the beyond the caste system. Well, I think the first thing beyond the caste system is everyone's personal belief. Everyone has that, and yet they're not able to exercise that because of the survival of collective knowledge. Because basically, education is taught you in a uniform way, and you are graded that way.
Now, does that sound familiar to what I was talking about earlier? That we're all taught a way of looking at how music is put together, usually based on a European system. Ornette Coleman came in and said, there's a different way to learning and to knowing how music is put together. Now you'll notice there are motives, little motives in the bass and the guitar. And there's sort of a thing going on in the beta, basically motives going in the percussion on this piece, right in the background.
In other words, the education that's very expensive, someone has to know that you know something. But the education that's not expensive, no one has to know that you know it, but you, right? That's very homilodic.
Remember I talked about dancing to Ornette Coleman?
The only truth that exists in harmonic is the will to do it without you trying to be in uniform. Like the alphabets that gives people meaning to names, to directions, and to intelligence, harmonic is a word that can be used in a way where it's serving more than one purpose for a person. It is not something that destroys. It's more something that makes things grow, makes things more clear.
This is Ornette Coleman trying to explain harmonics, which is a huge topic, and it becomes poetic and almost inarticulate. But I think in a little bit further in this video, you'll be able to see it becomes much more specific, and we're going to talk about how this relates to Butch Morris and conduction in just a moment.
Not a week goes by where I'm humming this melody in my head, thinking maybe.
Lou Reed is a punk rock legend who married composer Laurie Anderson, or is partners with Laurie Anderson. He had a huge career, and I think he's passed away recently.
I've written it, that I should go tape it, and I realize I'm humming Lonely Woman again. It's as though it took over part of my mind. It's just one of the most haunting, beautiful melodies I've ever heard in my life, and I still, incredible. I became aware of Ornette when I was, I'd been going to NYU, and I would go to every place that Ornette played. There's Billy Higgins, Don Cherry, Charlie Hayden. What an amazing, amazing bunch of musicians. It opened my mind up to a whole other way of doing melody and the harmonics involved in the melody. And I've tried to work that into some of the things I do. And of course the free jazz improvisations, like I tried to do that on guitar with feedback and all of that stuff. And that was a direct result of hearing Ornette.
What I'm trying to do with music is to use it as like its energy. When I mean a sequence, it's something that has the same design, but anyone uses it. You see that pattern right there? This is a sequence, but not like 1 and 1 is 2. It's like a sequence like if you open up a window and everything flies out the window.
13 north, 180 east.
So the Earth is a sequence. It's probably the real one.
Thank
guess there's not too many people these days who are in disagreement that Ornette Coleman may very well be one of America's greatest composers, especially since he's composed music outside of the mainstream in ways that were prototypically fun, and that he would dispose of standard European musical formulas and create his own language, which is what America's always done anyway.
Anyway, I'm writing this crew song right now. Yeah. So, if you tell me the initial of everyone's name, what's your initial?
M.
The closest, that's a B.
W.
That's another B.
E.
Oh, that's a real word. That's a real note. I.
Yeah.
I is an F.
P.
P is a flat. What is the last name? S. Oh, that's G. So that's G flat. A. Oh, yeah, that's another number. Okay.
And C.
Oh, that's good.
He's making this up.
Da, 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 da. I mean, it's not like that, but if you get an instrument, there's a real melody there.
On melodic.
Ornette, I think, is a genius, but he's a gentle genius. Once he told me that his life was just waiting for the next phone call. I thought, wow, what a sweet and unassuming way of describing his life. We broke a vase, and people just picked up the broken pieces and promised to meet in 10 years' time to put the object back together again. The act of coming back together again works as a healing, I think.
Non-melodic is a real usable word. For one thing, it doesn't have any gender. It's not a word that means man or woman or black or white or right or wrong or good or evil. It's just a word like a color.
All right, you can catch that on your own time, but I think it's a very helpful topic. What he basically means is that harmonics means individually improvised or created. A sound, it could be any sound. It doesn't have to be on your instrument. An instrument. It needs to be a sound that creates a harmonic movement when played. So when you're playing one sound against another sound, that creates a harmony. Let's say I'm shaking a piece of paper, and then I've got a drumstick beating against a concrete floor. That's going to create a harmony between these two sounds. I'm going to go now to a Butch Morris video. We're going to end with this quickly.
Meet Remarkable 2.
Is amazing.
A revolutionary new way to take notes with a paper feel.
And my conducting teachers couldn't answer my questions that I discovered.
This is Butch Morris.
I had to kind of go my own way with this. I started developing a vocabulary of signs and gestures to indicate certain things that don't exist in traditional conducting and that don't exist in improvisation necessarily. But then also I discovered that this whole idea dates back to the 1500s or before, and that Frank Zappa's done it, Charles Moffat's done it, actually one of the people I studied with here in the East Bay. Leonard Bernstein did it in the 60s. He actually has a recording out of print called Four Improvisations for Orchestra. Alan Silva, Senegalese named Doudou and Daye Rose. These are some of the people, of course, Lucas Foss, and it goes on. And I started to discover what their contribution to this idea was. But there was one thing that they did that I did not want. I did not want to limit my ideas to style, and I didn't want to limit my ideas to stylistic category. I wanted to work with musicians who wanted to explore the unknown. And so since then, I use a lot of traditional instruments from different countries with Western instruments, with electronics, and so on and so forth. Of course, when you do it within one community, that community tells you what it wants to do.
Okay, interesting comment. If you do it with classical musicians, they have a tradition of making music, and they tell you what they want to do. If you're doing jazz musicians who are typically working in that community, and you start doing conduction, they tell you what they're comfortable with. Not, you don't tell them, they tell you. One of the things that's important to notice in the vocabulary that that Butch Morris comes up with, I shared that document with an email. It's also something that was passed out in your binders. That whole idea of a hand gestures is a way of inviting individuals who have agency, individual agencies, and their own musical tradition or approach, whether they're good players or bad players, whether they've improvised before or this is a first time for them, it doesn't make any difference. The conduction, that the gestures that he comes up with is a vocabulary in leading an ensemble, in emitting from them, eliciting from them musical improvisations. Here's an example of that right now.
It means to develop something very specific. When I go like this, okay, don't play. This means to yield, by the way. Just means to pay attention. I'm going to give you some information. That's the information.
This is the information.
Ready?
Beat.
I'll tell you
Look at the beat.
That's the information. That's it. That's the information. So when I go like this, they're free to develop that on their own. On their own. When I go back, boop, 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 boop. You see what I mean? Okay, now we're going to take that information, we're going to take it out. And we're going to do it
Modulate.
like this.
Modulate. Make it louder. Improvise. Interpret. What's going on? Listen.
Yeah.
Come back to it. Come modulate down. Modulate down. Up, modulate up. Modulate up. Modulate up. Modulate up. Modulate up. Modulate up. Louder. Improvise. Back to the.
Come on.
Go back to the original material. Modulate down, 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 down. Softer. You can't see the softer and softer and softer. Doesn't cut them off. They're still playing.
Come on. Come on. From one bit of information, that all came from one bit of information.
All right. We've got 5 minutes till the end of the session. I would like to invite you to come to the second session today. You've listened a little bit. You've seen some of the signals. You can look at the Butch Morris vocabulary and sort of look at the things that you might use. We all have now motives that we have created because of Jacob's prompt yesterday. Something that we've got in our head, we know. And I'm going to lead the first conduction today. So bring an instrument. And if we don't have an instrument, I'll give you a piece of paper and you'll use the paper to make sound. Or you'll whistle, or you'll play a keyboard, or you'll find a percussion instrument something we're going to do together at what time is it? 3:15. I can't remember what time it is. Could somebody take their mute off and tell me what time the next session is?
1:45.
1:45. So at 1:45, we're going to come together. We're going to go a little bit longer than 45 minutes because I'd like to have two of you step up and lead a conduction. So I'm going to lead a conduction. We're going to learn some of the hand signals. We're going to try them out. And then I'm going to lead a conduction. And then I'm going to turn it over to two of you who want to step up and lead us in a conduction. Now, remember, the important thing about this is, and he said this at the very beginning, that he grew out of what Ornette Coleman was doing. He was giving agency to all of the people to do. You saw that Jackson Pollock painting that was on that cover of Free Jazz, and you heard this music that who could dance to that? People were dancing to it. That there is a different kind of agency you're giving every individual. I get to choose as a player. I get to choose what I'm going to play. You can't tell me I'm going to play a G major scale. You can't tell me what I'm going to do, but you can shape it in harmonics. What I'm doing and what you're doing have a harmony in some case, or dissonance harmony or a consonant harmony. And we get to do it together, and that's the harmonics about this. What Butch Morris does is not free jazz. Just do whatever you want. His free jazz is really conducted, and there is a sense of agency. You get to make whatever music that you want. I'm going to lead us through an experience together. And there's a way of breaking up the group into small groups or holding everybody together as a unit. So we'll do that. And I will demonstrate both of that, independent and then pull together as a unity. And then you're going to have a chance to lead an improvisation. Why is this considered generative? Anybody? Kevin, I know you have an idea.
Because you're generating new stuff every time.
Yep. And you're not only music, the sound, but how you put the sounds together. I only want the violin and Kevin, whatever you're playing. I want Tim and whatever Kevin's playing. And I want Charlie and Kevin and Tim to play a trio. I don't know what you're going to come up with, but there is going to be sustained sound, short sound, and I might give a rhythm like Butch was doing. This is the rhythm. Now, am I playing eighth notes? I don't think so. Bum, 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 bum. That is in rhythm, but how long is that rhythm? This is the subdivision, or maybe it's the beat that you're playing. That is interpreted by you. That is interpreted by you. Your agency is you're making the sounds. I'm leading this group. And there's a very interesting tension. Does this have to do with Western conceptions of sound and the way we organize ensembles and the way we organize sound? Yes, it's a direct. If you heard Butch talking about, Leonard Bernstein did this with the New York Philharmonic, an orchestra improvisation. We're now done. I will see you or not later this morning or later today. I'm going to be driving over to River Falls. I'll be there in time for lunch because I'm hungry. I'll see you guys soon.
All sonic information is information for construction. All.
That's it. Thanks very much. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.